Most of us love a good holiday and some lovely relaxing time, but it can be tricky to budget for it. So what I'm going to do today is share with you my 7 favorite money saving travel tips that can really help you get planning your next trip or your next holiday stress-free and without a giant budget. So let's dive in. Hello there and a warm welcome back to Simple Essentials. If you're new here, my name is Emmy and I'm a minimalist, but I also do love to travel. When I did my first trip with a friend of mine, so without my parents, I was 16 years old and I'm now 40, and I have traveled a lot in those years, both locally to Sweden where I grew up, but also my travels actually took me all the way to Australia where I now live with my partner and my cat in Melbourne in the south part of Australia. So I love to travel, I love the culture, and I love the relaxation that it can be to just be taken out of your everyday context and somewhere else. But it can be hard to afford it. So what I wanted to share with you today are 7 key tips or principles that I use that really can help you plan for a holiday and budget for a holiday and make all that good stuff happen. Because who doesn't love a good holiday? So let's dive in. So let's get straight into it. The very first tip that you've got to do if you want to travel on a budget is to make room for travel in your budget. If you're brand new to budgeting and it's not something you've tried before and you're a bit scared about getting started, I have a whole playlist about budget templates, etc. So you can click up here or in the description box below. I've also got a free downloadable budget template you can use to get yourself started. But the principle is very simple. Open an account either with your existing bank or another bank, whatever you prefer, and start putting money into that account on the regular. Even if it's just 20 bucks a month or 50 bucks a month or something like that, start making a regular saving. So straight when your salary comes in, send a small proportion to your travel fund or your adventure account or whatever you want to call it, and get in the habit of saving for it. Because I, to this day, have never borrowed money to travel, and I find that it's so much nicer and so much more enjoyable to enjoy the trip when you know you have the money saved up, so you don't have to borrow or have the hangover of having to pay it back later. So start by having a dedicated travel savings fund. Once you've got the savings sorted or the habit sorted to start saving, I want you to look at a realistic top-line budget. This can be a little bit difficult, and it obviously depends if you're traveling internationally or more locally. But what I would really recommend that you do is to have an idea, a top-line idea of what it's going to cost to go and do this thing. So for example, I live in Melbourne, Australia. My family live in Sweden. I know that a flight with a reputable airline that is going to be a decent travel time. It's usually between 24 and 28 hours travel time from Melbourne to Sweden. And I know that those flights are going to cost between $1,500 and $2,000 per person return. So before I've even added in any other things, I know that I need to budget $3,000 to $4,000 for my partner and I to go and fly over there. And then obviously I need to start adding in things like, where are we going to stay for most of the time? How long are we away for? Don't go too far down the rabbit hole here, but have a realistic expectation of what it's going to cost. The reason you want to do this before you start planning a detailed trip is if you know that a trip to Europe is going to cost you, or in my case, it's going to probably cost anywhere between $5,000 and $8,000 for 2 people to go for a couple of weeks. I need to be really aware of that, because then I can also make different decisions and go, well, actually, I can fly somewhere domestic here in Australia and stay for a week for a third of that price. And then I can start making decisions of what is possible to do further down the track and what I can do now. Speaking of fun, which is point number 3, is to pick 1 to 2 things that are really important to you or really fun to you that you want to do while you're there. So, for example, if you really want to do an outdoor activity, an excursion, a skydive, go to a particular restaurant or something like that, make sure that you budget 1 to 2 things that you really want to do, and then you can go a bit budget, frugal on the other things. So, for example, if you're traveling as well with friends or family or a partner and that person wants to do one thing, what I often recommend to people is that let them pick their thing and you pick your thing. And if there's budget for you both to go and do both of those activities together, then you can. And if you can't, and if you're literally on a very tight budget, they might go and do their thing for the day and you do your thing, and then you kind of reconvene later in the day. This is really important because if you're not getting what you want from the trip, you're not going to enjoy it as much as you build it up in your mind. So make sure that you have at least 1 to 2 things that you really want to do. Treat yourself to them and save on other stuff. Now that you're really clear on the things that are most important, you can start making a budget for the rest of the stuff. So the next tip is to really look at your transport category and do it kind of holistically. So an example is obviously you might want to, you will possibly have airplanes, you might need a rental car, there might be a train or a bus pass thing that you can get, or you might even want to purchase a vehicle. So for example, back in 2019, my partner and I took 4 months off work from here in Australia and went over to Europe to spend time both with my family as well as traveling around. Now we did our homework, we knew the flights were what they were going to be, so that was fine. So we had a budget for that. But then when it came to transport while we were there, we actually did our research and compared train network and bus tickets. We looked at things like rental cars, and someone in my family actually said, well, actually, if it's going to be that much to rent a car, you might as well buy a car, have it for 4 months, and then sell it. So in our case, thank you, family. That was a really good option for us and a really good way for us to be able to get to all those nature experiences in remote areas that we really wanted to go to. I'll include a photo here as well. That car was adorable and we loved it. It was a really old car, but it was still really fun and it opened up a lot of things for us that we hadn't been able to do otherwise. So looking at your transport category and how you're going to be able to get around while you're there is really important. Obviously, if you're going to kind of an all-inclusive or you're not going to really move around much, that's totally fine. But even basic things like how you're going to, if you're flying, how you're going to get from the airport to the hotel, how far is that? Is that a really expensive taxi fare? Knowing these little basic things before you go can really make your money stretch a lot further, and sharing transport with other people can really bring the cost down. So next up, we're going to look at where you're going to stay when you're away. And for a lot of people, or for some people, living in a really nice hotel room is a treat that's really important to them. So maybe for you, that's the one thing that you really want to splurge on, and then you can kind of go budget on other things. But for me personally, I'm more about going out and doing the experiencing. So when I travel, I usually look at a combination of hotels, Airbnb, hostels, which is shared accommodation, or campsites and cabins. So if you're pretty flexible in terms of where you're willing to stay, as long as it's clean and nice and has a good review, that can really save you a lot of money. Something like Airbnb, if you're traveling with a bigger group, you can share with other people and it really brings your cost down. Or even hostels. A lot of people think about hostels like, dirty, grimy backpackers, but actually a lot of hostels, especially here in Australia where I've traveled, but also in Europe, a lot of hostels can be really clean and a really great way to stay really inexpensively very close to the city centre. So look around, do some comparison depending how big your group is and where you're going, but you can save a lot of money that way. In 2019, we saved an awful lot of money because we stayed with family and friends for a big part of the trip, because obviously part of the trip was to see family or friends. But the other side, we actually did a lot of camping and we were lucky to be able to borrow a tent for free from a family member. But if we hadn't been able to do that, we would have just probably purchased a really cheap tent and an air mattress, traveled around with it, and either donated it before we went back or brought it back with us if we had the room in our suitcases. So get really curious about what accommodation options are available, because an expensive all-inclusive hotel, for example, is certainly not the only option you have. Which brings me to another category that is so easy to overspend, which is food. A lot of people will assume that just because they eat at home, they're just going to take that food budget with them and go somewhere else and it won't be more expensive. But firstly, you'll probably want to treat yourself a little bit more. And secondly, an interesting thing that people often forget is that you can't actually cook as much when you're away unless you have planned for that to be the case. So one thing we saved hugely on when we were in Europe is that we stayed in places, so like campsites or Airbnbs, where we could cook our own food. And we also made sure to often bring our own food and snacks when we were going out for day trips. So things like salads, sandwiches, granola bars, fruit, boiled eggs, bringing a thermos of hot water so you can make your own coffee. All those sort of things will add up really, really quickly. And for us, it was one thing that helped us stretch our travel budget a bit further so we could stay away for the whole 4 months without stressing about money. Naturally, we still splurged and we went out and did some fun things as well and had date nights and stuff. But our general default was to usually bring our lunch pretty much every day. And if we had a long day of driving, we would just boil a kettle of water in the morning wherever we were staying, put it in a thermos and bring that thermos with us so we could do a quick instant coffee wherever we were stopping, because we didn't particularly mind, and yeah, it helped our trip a lot. And the final tip that I have for you, which is one a lot of people forget, is to talk to the locals. Some of my absolute favorite travel memories have been totally unplanned, and they've been thanks to local people that have either shown us around or taken us under their wing. For example, when I first came to Australia back in 2010, I was traveling around Western Australia, north of Perth. And my friend and I at the time, we didn't have a car, we were on a bus, and we really wanted to go out and see some of the local stuff, but we didn't have a vehicle and we didn't want to pay for a tour because we were on a budget. So we stayed at a hostel and we simply just went and spoke to the guy who ran the hostel, who was at the front desk. And he said, well, look, actually, I'm taking this other guy out for a drive and we're going to go fishing and we're going to go to these hot springs. Would you guys like to come? So he took us under his wing and we came out with these guys for the day, had a wonderful time. It was really great. And at the end of it, we really wanted to give him something as a thank you. And he said, no, just buy me a beer or a drink. It doesn't really matter. You know, it was really fun to hang out with you guys. So that was an experience that I would have never had if we hadn't started talking to someone who was local. Another great thing that you can do is obviously talk to the Tourist Information Centre or Google free walking tours in the city that you're going to. We did this a lot in Europe and ended up doing a lot of completely free walking tours. It's optional to give the guide, which is usually a local person who just loves chatting to tourists. You can give them a little tip at the end if you want to, but it's really not mandatory, and you can get a lot of information about the city and get a really great experience. And you can also get some tips around where to eat and, you know, where's not too busy or what's good on this night of the week, etc. So talking to locals is a really great thing. Naturally, I just want to say here, use your good judgment. If your gut feeling says that this is not a safe place or you don't want to be there or it doesn't feel right, then naturally listen to that and be street smart. But talking to locals, more often than not, they're just so excited for you to be visiting their country and they want to show you around as well. So make sure that you lean in if you feel like it's the right thing to do, because I have many, many times both traveling by myself and with friends, and it has opened up amazing memories that I really cherish today. And there you go. Traveling does not have to cost an arm and a leg, but it will depend on where you go and how much you focus on it in your budget. I personally absolutely love to travel and I like to do as much of it as possible, which is why I'm sometimes more than happy to travel at an uncomfortable time of night because that flight is a bit cheaper, or why I'm happy to bring a sandwich along so I can do more adventures and excursions while I'm traveling. But there is no right or wrong here, and I would love to know in the comments below, what are some of your favorite travel tips and hacks? How do you save money when you travel with your partner or your family? And finally, if you like this type of content, please subscribe to the channel. I would love to have you as a subscriber here, and I look forward to see you in the next video.